Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Mark Fiorentino. Before I bring him on, I have to thank C60 Purple Power. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about C60, but it really is that awesome. I feel really amazing, and you should too. Learn more at their website. Just click the link in the description, and if you do place an order, you get 10% off plus free shipping. So go check it out. Your health is definitely worth it. And right now is an extremely tough time financially for a lot of people. And sometimes you need a loan. Check out cashadvance.com. They provide a free service that quickly connects customers with lenders that offer loans that may work for them. Cashadvance.com has no control or knowledge of the loan details between you and your lender. If you're presented with a loan offer, you'll have the option to review the terms of the loan, which you may approve or decline. You can create a free account, look around, and see what cashadvance.com has to offer with no commitment. Get the help you need today. Just click the link in the description to get started. And check out CuriosityStream. They are the award-winning destination for documentary series and features covering every topic from space exploration to adventure. You can satisfy your thirst for knowledge anytime and anywhere with CuriosityStream. The subscriptions start at only $2.99 a month. Just click that little link in the description and sign up today. Tonight, I want to welcome Mark Fiorentino. He has been obsessed with Einstein's unified field theory ever since hearing about it when he was 10. He worked for many years in the high-tech industry, including for IBM, and he is the author of the book Master of Reality. Mark, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you, sir. I'm doing well.
Very good. Looking forward to this. It's going to be fun. When you go back and look at the work of brilliant scientists such as Albert Einstein, they, of course, have changed the course of history through their work. They changed the way modern science is going in profound ways. Throughout modern history, we've had these brilliant men that have come along and started work, and I think it's great when researchers like yourself can pick up where they've left off and add to it and bring a greater understanding and possibly bring some of these wonderful technologies and possibilities into our hands. So it's really fascinating. And I know you had a really early interest in Einstein's work. What got you interested in that?
Well, yeah, back when I was 10 years old, I was going to catechism classes, and the nuns asked us to find a saint born on her birthday. So I went about the task of going home and asking my parents and looking wherever I could find anything. There was no internet back in 1965, so your ability to do a search was pretty limited. You would have to go to the library maybe, and I don't know how you would look up by date. But I went over to the calendar and looked to see if there was anybody notable on my birthday, March 14th. And sure enough, Albert Einstein was there. So not knowing whether he was a saint or not, I just went over to the Encyclopedia Britannica and started reading about Einstein. And I was just thrilled and fascinated by his story, and in particular, the unified field theory that I read as part of what I was doing when I was reading about Einstein. And I thought that theory just made so much sense. I could never get it out of my head after that. I just thought it was the most sensible and exciting thing that I ever experienced up till the age of 10. And that's how I got into it initially. And it was not like I was going to solve the unified field theory. I was just interested, curious about how the world worked, and I always kept reading, about things like science and then eventually UFOs and any kind of strange and interesting science, anything that might relate to the unified field theory and the forces of nature. So that's basically how I got into it to start. Then there was supernatural things that occurred later in life at the age of 20 that kind of guided me further.
Well, now that you've mentioned it, let's get into some of those those occurrences that happened in your early years that helped guide you into this?
Sure. Well, at the age of 20, me and some friends of mine decided that we were going to go to a place called Casadega. Have you ever heard of that place?
I have, and I've actually I visited a long time ago when I lived in Florida.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we heard about it. I heard about it in a class at the community college, and I thought, well, let's do that. Let's go get our fortunes told, and it'll be a blast. We'll have a good time.
Right.
And so me and a bunch of guys on the way to Daytona Beach, we stopped off at Casadega, which was about halfway there on the way to Daytona. So we pulled into town. It was an October kind of day, very blustery, windy, and even for Florida, it was kind of interesting. And I remember this song playing on the radio, and this really became the theme of my life. And the lyrics that were interesting to me went like this: distant hands in foreign lands are turning hidden wheels, causing things to come about which no one seems to feel. All invisible from where we stand, the connections come to pass. And though too strange to comprehend, they affect us nonetheless. I remember thinking, wow, I wonder if that's got anything to do with what's going to go on today when we get to Casadega. And so not much longer, we got there and we pulled onto the side of the road, me and the other guys in the other car. And at that point, a tree limb broke off of the tree and fell and hit their car pretty hard. And they got spooked and they left. So it was just me and this guy named Jeff Jones. We called him Duff. And we decided to go ahead and try to find somebody that could give us, tell us our fortune. And we did finally find a person. Her name was Martha McKay, and little old lady, the classic kind of a spiritualist, just a sweet old lady that had the gift of mediumship. And she took us in and she talked to me first, and everything she said over the years came true, every prediction. And the first thing she said to me when we sat down is, in your final years, you will be a spiritual teacher. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. I really don't know much about any of that, but okay, I just went with it. And then she told me about my future wife and the children we were have, and she hit everything. She told me about my future career, which was turned out to be electronics. She saw me in this structure with all these wires and cables, and she had trouble describing it, but she was old technology and she wasn't really familiar with all the new technologies that were about to come about. So she was seeing things she didn't understand. And years later, I saw myself with all the cables and the monitors are all around me, and I says, well, this is what she saw. And I knew she had that right. And
Wow.
everything else went normal. It was a normal reading. Then the other guy went in, he had his reading. We learned about our spirit guides and so forth. Very interesting. And I believed that stuff, and I know that stuff is real now because of things that happened to me after this particular event. And so we got into our car and we left and we got back on I-4 headed to Daytona, and we were talking, and then the guy, my buddy, said to me, well, it was pretty interesting what she said about you, Mark. And I says, what are you talking about? I had like a really normal, kind of almost boring. I mean, I found out about, I was going to get married. That was really high priority. I really was interested in getting married and having a family. And she said, no, man, she said that someday you're going to be world famous. And I said, what? Why didn't she tell me that? And
Huh.
she said, oh, you're going to make some discovery or something of that nature, some invention discovery. That part is kind of vague. I searched for the guy 45 years later, tried to find him, and I did find him, but he couldn't quite remember any of that anymore. It's been a long time, but I
Right.
remembered that, and it stuck with me. And through the years, it affected my thinking because I thought, well, had she told me directly, which I came to realize was deliberately, she did not, because I would imagine that the people on the other side, my spirit guides, told her not to,
Right.
because knowing me, I would have asked more questions and would have tried to do it right away. Because, hey, being famous, that might be fun. Uh, but one has to realize, we all have to realize, we have to go through a process in life. And the experiences can't be shortcutted. So I had to go through a lot of learning and experiences to get to the point where I finally wrote this book. So that was the other path. Two paths were leading toward the same direction: the interest in science and the interest in spirituality and the other side.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I want to continue on with these encounters with psychics that you've had through the years, which you've had a couple of more. Could you talk about that and how that kind of came into play with everything?
Sure. Well, while I was going through the years and reading books on UFOs and reading books on science, and just enjoying that and trying to figure the whole thing out, um, I had a marriage and it had troubles, and eventually, well, let's just go through a quick chronology.
Sure.
After Martha, the next weird experience was a year later, in 1975. It was Russ Burgess was a psychic at that time, touring at universities and giving demonstrations. I heard about it. I went to the auditorium with a recorder. Unfortunately, I can't find that tape. It was a good tape, but I remember the key points. And he did a demonstration where he blindfolded himself in multiple ways. There was no way he could see through. He was really taped, blindfolded, double blindfolded, had coins over his eyes. So he couldn't see the papers that we had all put into a little hat. And he pulled, I put a paper in there, and he asked us to put our name on there and a question. So, of course, I asked about, will I invent something important someday? Curious, see if this guy could follow up with anything.
Right.
So he pulled the first ticket out of the hat, and the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I says, I think he's got mine. And then he starts asking some questions, and yeah, that's me. And then he got my name. I says, well, that's pretty impressive. I haven't seen somebody do that before. And then he said, okay, you have a question. And he got the question right. You have a question about an invention. And I says, yes. And then he paused for a moment. And then he said, yes, you will do it, but it's going to take much longer than you think. And that's all he would say. And that stuck with me because he was pretty positive about it. And then he went on to tell the audience that, this was an unusual connection, and that I had certain abilities. He wanted to know more about what I did for a living and why that I had these powers that he called concentration. I said, well, I play chess a lot. That's all I can remember. That would kind of be equivalent to what you're talking about. And then he warned the rest of the audience, probably the rest of these won't be as clear cut as this connection. But so we went on from there. And then I thought, well, okay, there's another. See, I'm forming a pattern as I go through the years. I'm not, I'm looking for a pattern, an explanation for this whole mediumship and psychic phenomena. What's real? What is really going on in this world? Where do we come from? Where are we going? So I'm paying attention to everything they say. So the next time I have to go to a psychic, it's back at that same community college, and my mother is very, very ill now. I'm married, and thinking of going to tech school. So I want to go to tech school and learn electronics, but then I'm worried about my dad, and he might need help. I'm thinking of just taking a break and going to help my father. So Ann Gaiman, who's a very famous psychic, and now lives in the Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. I think she went up there to cater to the politicians who, wanted an extra, I guess, an advantage over the other politicians by checking with the other side. Anyway, so I walked up to her before the before her speech, and as I was walking up to her, she was sitting in the back of the room. She gave me this strange look, me and my wife, and then when I got to her, she says, "I just saw a bunch of angels shoot around you like they were in a panic." And they told me, and I can't remember if I even got the question out or not, but I know the answer was very direct. They says, "Whatever, you must not stop you must go to school. Do not skip school. Do not delay it. You must go to this school." So I got my answer, and I was surprised because I really thought they were going to say, "Yeah, go ahead, help out, and we could do this later on in life." But they were emphatic. You must not stop. And they were actually had looks of being frightened, which kind of caught me off guard because they're not usually that way. And so she went up to the podium and began this speech and saying she saw this thing that she's never seen angels do that before. And I thought, something is really strange is going on. Why is it so important that I go to this tech school and learn electronics? So this continues to happen throughout my life. I'm going to psychics because I believe that talking to the other side is going to the source. And if you want wisdom and knowledge, for questions in life, you're going to get your best stuff from the other side for what they can give you, because they just can't tell you how to live. You've got to figure that out. We have to figure that out on our own. They'll help and guide, but they're not going to tell you exactly what to do. So there's information being held back. And so this continues on, and then I go to marriage counseling, and the counselor suggests that I go to this psychic that she knows because of our circumstance. My wife and I are fighting because there's a lack of money, and I want some money so I can do research and do experiments, and I had no money, and I was working very hard at the time, a lot of overtime and everything, yet there was no money. So we went to talk to this psychic. Her name was June Rigg, and this is now 1985, 1986. And the first thing she says to me, "You will be a spiritual teacher in the final days of your life." So this is the second time somebody says almost the exact same words. So there's a cooperation in this point. And in this particular psychic, now my mother had by this time had passed away, and now at night and to my father, but mainly to my mom, because I don't think my father had passed away yet. He was very, very ill, but not passed away. But so I was praying to my mom, and I would invite her to sit into this golden yellow chair in the bedroom, and I would just have a conversation, about my day and how things are going, and hoping that she's okay on the other side. And so June says, "Your mother's here, and she wants you to know she's been sitting in the chair in the bedroom where you asked her to at night, and has been listening to your prayers." So that to me was proof positive that we don't die. We survive. When we get to the other side, we live on, and there is another side. And I couldn't find any greater, stronger evidence than that. So we go to the next thing, where the guardian angels actually saved my life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. You that you had an experience where guardian angels saved your life, and you've actually had visits since then from your guardian angels, right?
This is true. You're well briefed on my history. They must have listened to some of my other talks or something.
I have, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, sure. While driving home from work from IBM one night, I have this choice I make. There's a T intersection, and I can go right, the traffic is heavier, the route is shorter, it's more tense, but I might get home a little quicker. Or I can go left and go through the back roads. It's country. It's really quite relaxing. Takes a little longer, but it's a much nicer drive. So as I'm approaching, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to go left. And most of the time I went left. And then I hear this voice right next to my left ear, which says, don't go that way. And I whip around in my chair and look behind me because this is not a voice I heard in my head. It was like the person was right next to my ear and spoke. And I just shook it off and I says, wow, that's strange. And then I would say, well, I'm going to go left. And then it said again, don't go that way. And I looked behind me again. There was nobody there. And I stopped and I thought about it. And of course, like a very not smart person, I went that way because I was curious, not thinking that, hey, they're telling you this because there's danger ahead. And what I've come to learn is what I was approaching was what they call an exit point. And what's that? An exit point is a premature death. And you want to try to avoid that. And your spirit guides, usually I have two, and there's one that's the male was the person that's supposed to keep me alive through the whole process until I complete my work here. And so he had to step in and make sure I didn't die early that day. And, and I regret many times going that way because I didn't listen. And it must be as frustrating as hell for them on the other side when somebody won't listen to them when in such a dramatic way as, let's face it, you don't hear voices very often. That's the one and only time I ever heard a voice that clear. And, but I was so curious. I said, well, I'll be on guard. If there's an accident going to happen, it's going to happen head on. So I'll be looking ahead. I'll be making sure when I go through stoplights that there's nobody coming. And about 3/4 of the way there, sure enough, there's a truck coming up ahead, a pickup truck, and he's swerving wildly, and people are going off the road into ditches. He's coming into our lane, going back into the other lane. And the guy that I had in front of me, he bailed out. And then I saw the guy, he was coming right at me. So I turned the wheel as hard as I can and rode right into a ditch into the side of the road. And we missed by a few inches. And then that guy spun, turned around, and was stopped in the middle of the road, sitting horizontally across the road. And there were cars and trucks all over the place. But fortunately, nobody got hurt. And then everybody just kind of pulled into put it in reverse, got on the road and went home. So we never did find out why that guy was driving like a maniac. And there was no physical accident that occurred. So the voice was right. They could see ahead. They could see into the future. They could see what was coming and were trying to warn me. And they gave me enough of a warning that I was on guard so that I changed what was going to be a very bad future for me. I was able to dodge dying that day, thanks to my guardian angels. And I've come to learn over the years that happens to a lot of people. They get these warnings. It happened to my wife. She was about to go across a train crossing, a railroad track going an intersection, and she was looking the wrong way, and there was a train coming, and she was about to go, and I guess she had the music playing on, couldn't hear the horn or whatever. And just as she was about to go, she felt a little wind, like somebody blew on her ear. She turned to look and then saw the train and stopped. And I know of a lady that was pulled out from being hit by a train by somebody. And when she went to turn around to thank him, there was nobody there. So this happens a lot.
Yes, I've heard plenty of stories myself.
People don't realize this. They're with us. These guardian angels are with us every day, every hour, every minute, every second of our lives. There's never a time when we're alone. And so, I'm compiling all of this information. Say, hey, the afterlife is real. God is real. Jesus is real. There's something going on here. Why are we here? And I'm getting the answer to that question. And two paths, the science and the spiritualism, are working toward each other. They're going to come together when I write this book in the end, many years later. So then, I had some more incidences with later in life when I went through some more struggles. I was never going to find out about this invention or this fame or whatever. I was always going for what people typically go to psychics for. I was going to straighten out my life, trying to fix my personal life, or if you have health problems or money problems. That's the main reasons why people go to psychics, and that's what I was doing. So I went, and I had later on in 1993, 94, I had a hell of a hard time at that time. And I went to a lady who was a spiritual teacher, and she also said to me, in your final days, you will be a spiritual teacher. You will do work that is, how did she put it, humanitarian. And one time she did mention to me in one of our readings, she said, there's a 9-foot angel with you today, and he's telling me that you're writing a paper, a technical paper. And I didn't tell her anything about that at all. And that was absolutely right. The first time I was writing anything having to do with my theory, and was trying to explain the EPR paradox. And I said, yeah, that's pretty weird. So I'm wondering, do these angels of these high orders come down and help yahoos like me write little technical papers? I was wondering about that. And so these things, this is evidence that's piling up over the years. There's something going on the other side. They're coaching us. They're assisting us. And then it finally ends up with many years later. Now I skipped like 20 something years. I don't go, my life is good. I'm remarried. I have a happy life. So there's no reason to go to a psychic up until this day when I finished my book, which then I had this fluke thing happen. It was a winter's day here in Florida, and I wanted to make a fire in the fireplace. So I set the fire up, and I went out of the room for a minute. And in the couple of minutes I was gone, a bat came down the chimney and flew upstairs. We didn't know it though, until later on when my wife was up there and she saw the bat in the corner on the ceiling. So I had to catch the bat. And, I know about bats and rabies. And so, I knew to be, really careful. And I caught it in this bag, and I took it outside and let it go, which, by the way, is not what you should do. You should keep it for animal control, and it should be tested for rabies, because I let it go, and then the mistake happened. I was cleaning out the bag, which had this fluid in it, which I assume was either urine or saliva, which of course I went on the internet and read could have the rabies in it. And as I was cleaning it, some of that fluid or whatever splashed and hit me on the face, very close to my eye. Now I'm in a panic. Do I have rabies? Could I get rabies that way? And of course I could. I read it in the internet. That's remote possibility, but you could. So now I know that's a 100% terminal disease. If you get it, you die. There's no escaping it. So I'm calling up the people at the health bureau and at the county and saying, just give me the shot. I wasn't bitten or scratched, but I'm not absolutely sure I didn't get infected. And they said, oh, you'll be fine, Mr. Fiorentino, don't worry about it. So I says, all right, well, I'm going to worry about it. Couldn't get out of my head. So I said, I got to find Patty in Charlotte and see if I can find what's going on. But she's long gone. It's been over 20 years and I can't find her anymore. But I did find Tamara Richardson with the Southern Bell Medium, who's doing very well. She's a 6-time near-death experiencer and a professionally trained evidential medium. So I contacted her and she gave me a reading and she said, no, you're okay. You didn't get infected there. And I was able to talk to my parents again. I could tell it was them. And And then since all of that worked out and everything was okay, I thought, well, I got her on the line, and I just finished this book, and the theory of super relativity to me seems like it's right. It seems like this is the solution to the unified field theory. But it's hard to believe with me being not an extraordinary person, just an ordinary kind of guy who's good at troubleshooting. I'll admit to that. I thought, could this possibly be right? So I asked her. And then that's when that reading went from an ordinary reading to a very strange reading. And things came out in that reading. I will tell you some of them because it gets pretty fantastical. And basically, in that reading, I was told I actually have the theory right. It's the solution for the unified field theory. So now I have to deal with that amazing thing, which is even hard for me to believe, but yet it appears to be so. And then I was given instructions as to what to do, and which is very different than you usually get in a reading. I mean, I got some very high detail instructions and information confirming the theory, and people came through like Albert Einstein, who that was a very interesting story when he came through. This lady, Tamara, is not a scientist, but she asked me, why is Einstein closing his hands together? Now, all throughout the book, I'm asking Einstein, is gravity contraction of space? You know, I just looked for that, for him to say those two things in a paragraph or in a sentence. Gravity, contraction. I'm always asking Al, you know, because, you know, that's what you do. You know, you're thinking, you're having a conversation in your head. So when she's saying this, I said, oh my God, he's answering my question. How could anybody know that? When he's bringing his hands together, he's telling me it's a contraction of space. It is a contraction. So I says, wow, we're really talking to Einstein here, and he seems to know what I'm working on. And so I'm going to leave it at that, not go into any more details into that part, because maybe someday I'll play that tape that I got on tape, and that's an extraordinary reading, memorable for sure.
Wow. Yeah, that is super interesting. Now, I want to get into some of the science that you've been working on. I am in no way a science guy. So if you could tell us first, what is the unified field theory, and tell us what super relativity is, and, you know, how it's related, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, that's what the whole book is all about. And what is unified field theory? I could say it very simply. Basically, electromagnetism and gravity emerge as aspects of a single fundamental field. So that's actually a very simple and sensible approach. So what I had to do is really kind of break down Einstein's version of unified field theory. And I did not work on the quantum mechanics version, which is called the standard model of fundamental particles and interactions. That's the wrong course. And I didn't waste my time working that solution because the model is incorrect. So I went with Einstein's model, which was built upon Newton's ideas, James Clerk Maxwell's ideas, and Lorenz's ideas, as well as Einstein. So basically, the unified field theory is finding a way that electromagnetism and gravity emerge as the same thing. So what is the single fundamental field? So I went back in history and I found the single fundamental field, and that field is called the ether. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. Yes.
Good. So the ether is really basically saying that space is a substance. And what I was able to determine by going back in history and reading over all the the theories back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was basically the theory of the ether is a low density, high tension, completely transparent, continuous quasi-elastic material. I mean, there's a lot of description there, but I wanted to give you all I got there. And quasi means that whenever you bend this thing, when the force is removed, it snaps back into place. So that's what the quasi-elastic means. And it's continuous. So basically that means it's a solid. And if you look up the word solid, you'll learn that the basic definition is something that is continuous. I know we like to think of the solid as wood and metal and steel and glass and anything that's impenetrable. But in this case, solid means continuous. So the unified field theory is determining whether the electromagnetism, which I deconstructed into the electrostatic field of force, the magnetic field of force, and gravity, the third final field of force, are just different bendings of space, different deformations of that material object, that single fundamental field, the ether. That's what force, action at a distance, comes from, is different ways that that field is stretched. Like, for instance, the electrostatic field is a twist of space. The magnetic field happens when that twist, that vortex shape, moves through space. It, as a reaction to that twist moving through space, space rotates. And when that rotation happens, the magnetic field emerges around the moving charge. So we start with charge, the electrostatic field. That charge moves and creates the magnetic field. So now we're already 2/3 of the way to solving a unified field theory. Now all we got to do is, how does electromagnetic particles generate a gravitational field? And that's what Einstein worked on to the very last day of his life. He worked on different models that he could come up with. He just didn't have enough information in his time. He was born too early. If he had been born 50 years later, he'd have solved this. I'm sure of it, because he was on the right track. And what I did was I took it up from there. I had the extra information. I was able to learn about the quarks that he didn't know about. And from that, I was able to determine how the neutron and the proton create mass, create a gravitational field by the accelerated motion of unbalanced charges. Whenever that happens, a gravitational field or a contraction of space happens. And that, I got that idea from Einstein. So that's basically the unified field theory, broken down as much as I could. And there's like an onion with a lot of layers, but once you examine the layers and you piece them together, it all makes sense.
Right. It is a lot of layers. I want to get what your understanding of gravity is, because it seems
Sure.
that still modern scientists still don't have a complete grasp on gravity.
You're absolutely right. The origin of mass, the origin of the gravitational field, which objects have mass because they're generating a gravitational field. They wouldn't have it without that happening. So gravity comes about from Einstein's idea. I pieced together the clues that he left behind, and I was able to understand the meaning. So let's examine this. We're talking about gravity now, how we make gravity happen. So I take this thought from what turns out to be Einstein's happiest thought. He described it, and it's in Amir Excel's book entitled God's Equation. So listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Einstein followed a line of reasoning that began with the happiest thought of his life. Still at the Swiss Patent Office, he conducted one of his famous thought experiments. Einstein imagined a circle spinning in space. The center of the circle did not move, but its circumference was moving quickly in a circular direction. Einstein compared what happens in several reference frames, a standard tool he used in developing the special relativity theory. He concluded, and I'm underlining this in your mind and hit it with bold, he concluded using his special relativity that the boundary of the disk contracted as it spun. There was a force acting on the circle at the boundary, the centrifugal force, and its action was analogous to that of the gravitational force. But that same contraction that affected the outer circle left the diameter unchanged. Thus, Einstein concluded in a way that surprised even him, the ratio of the circle to the diameter was no longer pi. He deduced that the presence of a gravitational force, or field, the geometry of space was non-Euclidean. It was bending. It was contracting. I thought, okay, that all makes sense. He just didn't know exactly how that was happening in his time. So I took that idea and I brought it forward to particles. So I realized that there was three quarks inside of the neutron and the proton, the up and down quarks. And I knew they had to be moving in some fashion. And now I know that the fashion they have to be moving in is an accelerated motion. And fortunately, when particles move in a circular manner, that's a type of acceleration. And putting the dots together, the links, acceleration, Einstein, there was the equivalence principle. Are you familiar with that at all?
No, not really.
Well, the equivalence principle just basically says somehow gravity and acceleration are the exact same thing. But nobody really could explain how that could be. Newton knew it. He was the first one really to discover it. And force equals mass times acceleration. And so there was already somebody that figured something out. But again, that force, action at a distance, was a mystery how that was being created. And so I put the gravitational concept to work by saying that the particles inside of the neutron and the proton, the primary mass generators in this universe, were being created as a result of the motion of those quarks, the accelerated motion of those unbalanced charges inside of the neutron and the proton. And the other particle that does the same thing, only at a much larger circumference, is the electron. It's got much less gravitational strength, but they're all moving in circular patterns. And a circular type of motion is called a uniform circular motion, is accelerated. That's the link, because the velocity changes due to continuous changes in the direction of motion. Thus, for a body moving in a circular path at a constant speed, its velocity changes continuously, which means it's accelerating. And that's how acceleration is equal to gravity, because whenever something accelerates, remember Einstein's happiest thought, he concluded using his special relativity that the boundary of the disk contracted as it spun. The same thing is happening with the quarks. As they move in this circular pattern, as they move in this pattern, there's a contraction in and around each particle, so that since particles are made from space, they are configurations of space, fields, bendings of space. The space is going to contract when these things are moving that way, and that creates the gravitational field. So that's where it comes from. I don't know how to say it any other way other than how I just described it. But it's all about accelerated motion of unbalanced charges. And when they do that, they cause space to contract. And since they're doing it so fast, I calculated at 99% the speed of light or slightly greater, they're going to generate just that little tiny bit of mass. And when you put these particles together, it's an additive effect, and the gravitational field builds and gains greater strength. So that's how gravity happens. I mean, right down to the very detailed, the high detailed mechanical explanation. So what is gravity? Gravity is just merely the result. It's the contraction of space. It's a gradient field.
Very interesting. Now, earlier when you were talking about one of the papers you were working on, you said that it was confirmed through one of your psychics that super relativity was the answer to the unified field theory. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, basically, I was talking to Tamara Richardson, and when I asked her, is the super relativity correct? She she looked at me. It was my mother speaking to me. She's, oh, it's right. And then I got real excited, and I looked back at my wife who was sitting behind me, and I gasped when she said that. She says, if super relativity is right, then I've solved the unified field theory problem. And I do have a solution, and there's a formula that I use. It's called uh, the moment of inertia. And and I did some research on the moment of inertia, and it's a particular type of formula. And Einstein, in his last days, said, whoever solves this, he told, I think it was Pauly or somebody like that, says it's going to be a rank 2 tensor. And I had no idea what my formula was, so I did some research, asked around, and it turns out that the moment of inertia is the classical example of a rank 2 tensor. So there was more confirmation. So Tamara was basically, with all the people that came through, it was not just Einstein, it was Ray Bradbury, and then eventually Jesus came through and was giving instructions. And, I was dumbfounded. I am still dumbfounded by this. It just seems so unbelievable. And but yet I feel I have this responsibility. I have done this work. This theory does make sense. There is a whole book full of evidence that I use to compile this theory. I reestablish that the ether does exist. I explain how particles create the motion of particles through space creates a gravitational field, and then was able to move forward from that and realize if we can contract space, we can expand space. And if we can expand space, then there's going to be anti-gravity.
I've always thought that if we can get modern science to work more with the spiritual or metaphysical and kind of look into that and take it seriously and not just some woo-woo thing that's dismissed, I think we could make leaps and bounds with our science, technology, and combining it with spirituality, and then learning more about metaphysical and having more understanding of that and how it works with science. We could be in a whole new world, a much better world, I believe, if we could kind of marry those two.
Chris, you're absolutely right. You're a wise man, and that's exactly the same feeling I have. It makes sense. It's a shame that science has separated itself from religion. It really it's keeping them in the dark, and a lot of that's due to quantum mechanics and the emergence of that philosophy that doesn't make sense, and that there isn't causation and there isn't determinism, and things just happen, and it's all gets down to nonsensical magic after a while. And the irony is, my theory is an intelligent design theory, so that means God is involved. God is the creator. God is the source. All I've done in my attempts, and I even got that idea from Einstein. He once said, it's going to agree with what you say, basically. He said once, I want to know how God created this world. I am not interested in this or that phenomena in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are just details. Well, I kind of agree with that, and that's why I went and started deliberately using near-death experiences. I have some in my blog on my website that clearly state that science is underneath religion. It's like if you have a pyramid of knowledge, when you get to the top, there's the creator. The creator is the person that creates the laws of physics, all the physical laws, all the constants, all the fine tuning, which we have loads of evidence for. Uh, that's the most logical and reasonable explanation for why the universe is tuned so perfectly. You know, the Goldilocks enigma. Um, it to ignore God and religion is to keep yourself basically in the dark. And you're right. It's time to join the two together. There are psychics that have submitted to testing, and like George Anderson, and they've been proven to be real and true. George Anderson is an amazing psychic. Tamara, who the person I went to, is an amazing psychic. Uh, this is an important way to get information, and I did use this avenue in my research, and I was able to find the signature of God because of a near-death experience by a person. Lynn Claire Dennis was her name, and that I have 2 chapters in my book dedicated to describing the exact type of motion of particles as being seen in heaven by Lynn Claire Dennis, the trefoil motion pattern. So you're right. We've got to start including the creator in helping to explain the creation. And there's a lot of chapters in my book, Cosmology section. There's 3 chapters where I re-go through the Big Bang, only this time it's all sensible. So it's a beautiful system. The theory of super relativity is truly a theory of everything.
Now, I want to get into, we talked about gravity. Let's talk about what anti-gravity is.
Sure. Well, let's talk about quickly the pattern that helped me recognize what gravity is, and then it's going to help you understand what anti-gravity is.
Sure.
For many years, I used to sit in my cubicle, and in between jobs that I'd go out and do during the day, I would look at that fundamental particle and interactions chart, and I would say, there's got to be a pattern here. Why do all these particles have mass, but yet there's one that has no mass, the photon? And I look at it as an electromagnetic particle, just like all the other particles, but there is something different about it. It finally dawned on me. I says, the photon is got a perfect balance of positive and negative charge. So it's not unbalanced. It's a balanced charge. And the way the photon moves is differently than the way all the other particles move that are unbalanced charges, either too much positive or too much negative. They all move kind of like in these circular fashions, but not the photon. It moves in a straight line at a constant rate of speed, which means it does not accelerate. So now, doesn't that make sense? Acceleration is the same thing as gravity. Einstein said that, the equivalence principle. He describes how contraction occurs by an accelerating object. The photon does not accelerate. It backs up what I'm saying. It makes sense that it doesn't generate mass because it doesn't accelerate when it moves. It moves at a constant rate and in a straight line. Absolutely no acceleration, absolutely no mass. So that was one of my happiest thoughts that I've ever discovered. And that's how I got to the idea of how mass can be created. It must be created by this particular type of motion. So now we know that some particles can move in a way that kind of doesn't generate mass. So if we could amplify that somehow, maybe we can cause anti-gravity. But yeah, we have to understand what causes particles to move. And that leads to another discovery of mine, which I call the slip wave. And all particles, have you ever wondered how they go about moving at such rapid rates perpetually, forever? Ask a physicist, how does that happen? You're going to get a lot of mixed up answers. Mainly they'll say, well, it has momentum. Well, where does it come from? How does a photon manage to move 13.7 billion light years and never slow down? We couldn't build a rocket to do that at the speed of light. It would take all the energy in the universe. Something's got to be going on with that particle, specifically inside that particle. It's the structure that creates its motion. And so how could that happen? And now we're heading straight toward, once we discover how particles move, we will also discover how to create an anti-gravity field. So now what I realize is that particles are like little tiny twists of space. So let's just take the electron, I guess. It has I think it's a counterclockwise, it doesn't really matter, counterclockwise spiral shape. And so what that means is space is a convolution, it's a twist, and it goes for a full 180 degrees. So if you imagine twisting something, like imagine in your mind you have some silly putty and you're going to twist it. Look at it as you twist it. See how it's stretching in the twisting region? It's actually coming apart. It's getting thinner. As the more you stretch it, you'll see the whole thing gets thinner and thinner until it breaks. So that's what's happening with space. It's twists of space cause a stretching motion, and this causes an expansion. So the density of space drops and the tension increases when you twist space. And that's the secret for motion, because inside of particles, when you do that, you start off with a very small deformation of twist, and it gets larger and larger to the full 180 degrees. So you got what forms inside of that full twist area is a pressure wave, and that pressure wave is what causes things to move. If you research in physics, you'll find pressure pretty much always the cause of motion. Pressure in a hose causes the water to move. Pressure on the wing causes the airplane to have lift. A low pressure on the top side, high pressure on the bottom side. Difference in pressure in a hot air balloon causes it to rise. Pressure, pressure, pressure is always the answer to motion. So I've discovered there's a pressure gradient inside of particles, and that gives them velocity. And that is the key to anti-gravity, because there's propulsion in there. And that's what's needed to cancel the effects of gravity. You need space to expand, and twisting can do that. So now, how can we use something that we have available to us to create a gravitational field? This is where I go back to my childhood and put another pattern together. I remember reading in UFO books that in Project Blue Book, the investigators from the Air Force, most of the time, if there was a landing site to investigate, they brought something called a magnometer. Do you know what that is, Chris?
Yes, I have heard of a magnometer.
Yeah, it's a magnetic field detector. And why would they bring a magnetic field detector to a landing site? They know something. They know that UFOs use magnetic fields. So I remember reading in one of these little investigations that they picked up a blade of grass and they found that it was magnetized. And I thought to myself, this has something to do. Either the magnetic field is the cause of the anti-gravity field, or it's a byproduct of an anti-gravitational field. And I came to the conclusion that the magnetic field is the cause of the anti-gravity field. So I kept that in mind for many years. I didn't know how it did it. It took many, many years of reading and going through all of what I just told you, that realizing that magnetic field is a rotation of space, and when space rotates, it stretches. And when space stretches, it expands. And if you get that field strong enough, it will cancel or offset or block the gravitational field. you've got two fields basically battling each other. One is going one direction, one is going in the other. So if you have enough magnetic field strength, and it seems to help if you rotate it, because if you'll notice around UFOs, at landing sites, they have this spiral pattern where the wheat is laid down or the corn or whatever is laid down either clockwise or a counterclockwise pattern. So that's telling me that magnetic field is in motion, in a circular motion around the bottom of the UFO. So perhaps that's enhances the anti-gravity effect. So that's how anti-gravity is generated. You have to cause space to expand. The best tool for that is the magnetic field, because the magnetic field is not really like ionized. You could use the electrostatic field, but it's hard to work with. It'll throw thunderbolts if it gets too high. It ionizes everything, whereas the magnetic field, you can work with that. And the stronger you make it, eventually you can block gravity, and whatever's above that gravitational field will just float, because the attraction pull from the earth below is not felt anymore. So that's how anti-gravity works. Basically, it's an expansion of space, and we use magnetic fields, and I'm sure UFOs use magnetic fields to create this expansion effect and gravity shielding effect. And it also can be used for propulsion. So while I'm on a roll here with this anti-gravity thing, there's one more important fact to reveal.
Yeah.
James Clerk Maxwell discovered that the speed of light, which I dispel in my book, is said to be constant, but it's really not. And I have put out a lot of evidence proving it's not, and why it's not, because James Clerk Maxwell, determined that the speed of light is equal to 1 over the square root of permittivity times permeability. So permeability and permittivity are properties of space having to do with the formation of the electrostatic field and the magnetic field. Perfect. So space has these two properties, which means space is a real physical thing again. More evidence proving the ether exists. If the ether was a void, like many physicists think today, made of nothing, it wouldn't have permeability. It wouldn't have permittivity. And certainly particles that move through space are transverse waves. And all physicists know that transverse waves must have a solid to move in. They primarily move in solids. Again, confirming the ether. The evidence is overwhelmingly in favor that space is a physical something. And so what I'm getting at here is that if you adjust permittivity and permeability, if you can mess with them somehow, you can change the speed of light. And if you're going to build a UFO to go to other star systems, it's not good enough to go to speed of light. It's way too slow. If we wanted to go to Proxima Centauri, 4.2 light years would take us 4.2 light years one way. That's intolerable. That's not usable. You have to go tens of thousands of times faster. And the only way to do that is master the spatial bias. You have to use a force field to bias space so that you reduce permittivity and permeability. And when you do that, you can go virtually any speed you want, up to infinitely fast if you shrink permeability and permittivity to zero. If you plug that into the equation, you'll find that the speed becomes undefined, it becomes infinite. So that is how that aliens can get here. They have to be going tens of thousands of times faster. Like to get from a 60 light year star away from us to here, they could do it in 15, 20 minutes. Nice. That's the way it has to be, because it's incredibly unsafe traveling beyond the speed of light. That's another whole subject we can get into if you
Yeah,
want.
well, now that you've mentioned UFOs and you talked about Project Blue Book and how they know something because they brought the magnetometer out there,
Right.
um, I believe, of course, that there is a cover up of this technology, anti gravity technology, that we already have and that we've probably had for years. I'd like to get your thoughts on that and how advanced do you think that we already are working with anti gravity technology?
Yeah, you're right. I'm certain they do. And in my travels and meeting people, I have met people that want to remain anonymous, but I can tell you that I've been given evidence now that absolutely confirms beyond any shadow of a doubt they have this technology. It's been eyewitnessed. And, yes, they have it. They've had it since probably the 47, 48, somewhere in there. Um, and they've worked on it through the 50s and the 60s, perfecting it. And they probably do have some sort of space force now. And there's lots of stories coming out. I don't know which ones to believe and which ones are disinformation. But if they're not using magnetic field explanation, I say it's disinformation, because it's the one and only way I can conceive of where we could break the light speed barrier. And it has to be something like this. To be able to do that. So yeah, I agree with you. They have it. They're working on it. They probably know everything that I've told you tonight, because they probably already were filled in when they were reverse engineering the UFOs, and I'm sure that they have captured some aliens along the way, and they were able to enlighten our physicists and so forth who are working on these projects as to how the universe really works. And so, yeah, I'm sure they have it.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned, there've been a lot of talk of UFOs in the mainstream media, Pentagon releasing videos talking about how they could possibly have off-world technology already. Why do you think now that there's all of a sudden an uptick in all this talk about UFOs?
Yeah, especially the Tic Tacs and all the release
Right.
by the
Yeah.
Navy. That's a big, to me, a very positive sign, because they've always took a hard line on no releasing information, deleting all the files, and all of a sudden, official branch of the U.S. government, an authority, is releasing this information like this. This is unheard of. So I'm thinking maybe they're getting ready to come clean. Maybe at some point they need to, or have decided that they need to come clean on this whole thing. And I got to tell you, we are not safe. This civilization is not safe until we have full anti-gravity capability in the commercial world, where we have transports that if something really bad happened here on Earth, there's a variety of things that can go wrong. We might need to be able to get off this planet. We need to have a colony some other planet. We need to establish that. We need to bilocate somewhere else, just in case something goes wrong that we can't fix using our anti-gravity technology. One of the things that concerns me a lot is the instability of the Earth's core. My theory gets into what I think is going on in the Earth's core, which is highly controversial. But once again, I think it's actually right. And if they examine the sun, they will learn eventually, and I'm making a prediction tonight on your show, the sun has a neutronium core. Neutronium being, it's a neutron star. It's an object made of pure neutrons. There's nothing else. It's just neutrons packed tightly together. And this is my theory for star formation, which makes a much greater sense than the current theory of gas just magically comes together in outer space, which makes no sense, since hydrogen, which are basically protons with electrons, have an enormous repulsive force, many orders of magnitude greater than gravitational pull. So how the hell does hydrogen gas and space, which is not dense at all, just suddenly form into this incredible pressure? It makes no sense. The only thing that makes sense is there was a gravitational source that gathered the hydrogen. So what we're going to find is that the sun has a solid neutronium core, all stars. And what I'm concerned about is maybe even the planets have a smaller neutronium cores, and that's how they were formed. So that's one thing that's very important, that, you never know, a planet might just not be stable and could explode. Let's look at what happened at the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. There's people that theorize that was a planet at one time. So I want to make sure, my goal is to make sure the human race has this technology, and it's time to bring it forward. We can't keep it secret anymore. We need to mass produce these things. It'll benefit humanity greatly and bring on a utopian age, I hope. So
Now,
that's what I have to say with that.
yeah, excellent. And it's speaking of what we can do to kind of bring forward this age. You also talk about experiments to prove the theory of super relativity, high magnetic experiments that physicists across the world should be doing these. So could you talk about that?
Yes. Yeah. In the very last chapter, I talk about performing some simple experiments using magnets to detect the drop in the gravitational field for objects that are suspended above the high magnetic field, the intense magnetic field. Now, I'm also thinking, the more I've thought about this, and I spend a lot of nights awake thinking about these sort of things. Much of my book was written between the hours of 2 and 5 in the morning. That it might be helpful to rotate the magnetic field. I think I have an experiment example where I do that. I have to go back and check now, but I think that would be very helpful to do that, since the UFOs seem to be using magnetic fields, rotational magnetic fields, and there's two scientists who have made breakthroughs, but were covered up. Eugene Poklanoff and Ning Li, I think, was the other scientist, who both discovered that rotating superconductors, but there was a magnet underneath them, seemed to create a loss of mass or weight of objects that were suspended above these rotating devices. So yes, I'm encouraging humanity, not just in the United States, but all over the world, to do these type of experiments. Let's get over the idea that anti-gravity is science fiction. No, it's not. It's real, and we need to discover it now. We should have discovered this at least 50 years ago. And thanks to the disinformation that's been going on by our own government, and help with physicists who seem reluctant to believe in this, except for the ones that work for the government who know better, we haven't progressed. And we need to have this technology. There's a lot of things that it can be used for to protect the Earth from bad things like large asteroids and meteors hitting, or comets hitting the planet and causing mass extinctions. We could use anti-gravity drones to deflect those things quite efficiently and protect the Earth. We just need to, get all of mankind's technology and great knowledge behind this, and the physicists, we need their help as well. We need them on board with this and working hard to bring this technology forward.
Definitely, I agree 100%. And to close out on tonight, I want to talk about, you've noticed a pattern, and I've noticed this as well. I've noticed that there's a sort of awakening going on around the planet of consciousness. People not only waking up to things that are going on behind the scenes, that they're being lied to, that they've been lied to for their whole lives, but becoming more conscious and spiritual, and just looking at just the world behind ours, and just looking at things in a new way. I've noticed a massive change in people very quickly recently. And you talk about a new age of man that's coming. Tell us your thoughts on that.
I'm glad to see that you've noticed that too. I agree with you. Yeah, I've read a lot of NDEs. I mean, a lot, and I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube. And there's some really good ones too. But I look for patterns in what they're saying to back up, to confirm my thinking. And some of these guys, like Howard Storm, have revealed or had revealed to them that God has a plan. And do you realize that in the United States alone, there's something like 200,000 NDEs in a year? That's like an enormous number.
Wow, that is a lot.
And they're all across the world. They're in the millions, and they're going forward. And when these people, not all of them write books, not all of them go on the radio or in the TV, only a small percentage of them do, but the others, they they're moved to talk about it, and each time they talk to somebody, they convert, because this person, and they're not lying. They're telling the truth. They've experienced something that's real. It's more real than what we have here, and it's divine, and it's spiritual, and it's loving, and it's compassion, and it's all about goodness and happiness, and it wants this world to be happy. But there's a lot of evil going on in the world, so there's kind of this battle of good and evil that's happening probably on the other side and spilling into this world. That's the current conversation that I'm hearing. So all this that you're seeing in the news right now is kind of a product of all this battle between good and evil. And God has got a plan that he's going to help try to prevent the worst case scenario from happening. Just like I was prevented from having a head on, God is trying to prevent the world from having a head on collision on its own. With all the bad behavior and things that are going on in the world now, by enlightening people, having them building an army basically of goodness and of good people with virtue, and these NDE people are inspiring other people, and hopefully we can avoid a bad ending. But even if the worst case scenario happens, and evil wins the battle, it never wins the war. It'll be overcome, and things will get good again. So hopefully we can do better and not have the big battle with great casualty and loss of life, but instead have a renewed realization. I would say that that we're all the same. We're all one human being race, and we shouldn't be against each other. We really should be for each other, and that's what to me, the whole NDE experience is all about. It's learning that we should be loving and compassionate toward each other, and I think that's what I hope wins out in the coming days.
Yeah, I definitely hope so too, and very well said. Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight. It was fantastic information. If the audience is interested in finding out more about your work, give us your website, social media, anywhere else that they can find your work.
Sure. My website is www.super-relativity.com. And you could friend me on Facebook if you want. And I'm starting a YouTube page and starting to put little interviews and whatever on there for people to come and listen to, especially if you are hard of if you're have visually impaired or whatever, you can at least listen to my talks and such, and invite you to come over and do that. I'll try to work on getting some more of those things going, but that's where I'm at. I'm on YouTube and my website and my blog. Please stop by and see my blog and read some of those articles. I'm always adding new ones, and that's where I'm at right now.
Excellent. Mark, thank you again. And there's so much more that we could talk about, so I'd love to have you back on sometime in the future.
Definitely. Just pick a date and let me know, and I'll check my schedule. We'll get back on, and there is a lot more to cover. I got a lot of discoveries in my book. It's really kind of amazing. It's like a miracle. I don't quite understand how all this happens sometimes, but there's amazing things inside of the book that I'm inviting people to discover and have hope about.
Definitely go check out that book. Mark, thank you again and have an excellent night. And good night, everyone. Until next time.